You want to know the moment I knew we were going to die? It wasn't when the first RPG hit the ridge. It wasn't when Martinez went down and nobody could get to him. It wasn't even when the comms went dark and we realized, really, truly realized, that no one on the other end knew where the hell we were anymore. It was the silence afterward. That specific kind of silence that settles over a kill zone after the first wave of contact. Like the mountain itself is holding its breath. Like the whole world pauses just long enough to let you understand what you've walked into. That's when I knew. And I think every one of the 381 men crouched in that valley knew it too, even if none of us said it out loud. Let me back up. Because to understand what happened that night in the Kunar province, and what she did, what Sergeant First Class Delara Yousefi actually did when every protocol said she should have stayed exactly where she was, you have to understand how we got there. You have to understand the geography, the intelligence failure, the specific chain of decisions that walked 381 American special operators into a gorge that the locals had been calling Margdara for 400 years. Death Valley, roughly translated. We didn't call it that. We called it Sector 9 on our maps. We called it the infiltration corridor in the briefings. We called it a lot of things that sounded tactical and controlled and professional. The locals had been more honest. It was October, late October, which in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan means the temperature drops fast after sundown, fast in a way that catches you off guard even when you've been there before. I'd done 2 previous rotations in country. I thought I knew what cold felt like in that part of the world, but the Kunar at altitude in late October is its own thing. It's a cold that gets into your gear, into your body armor, into the space between your fingers when you grip your rifle. The operation had been planned for 6 weeks. Operation Silent Crown, that was the name. I always found it strange, looking back, something almost pretty about it. Silent Crown, like it belonged on the cover of a fantasy novel rather than a classified briefing folder with blood on it. The objective was a network of supply routes being used by a mid-level HVT, high-value target, to move weapons, money, and fighters through the provincial border. The intelligence picture, we were told, was solid. ISR assets had been tracking movement through the gorge for 3 weeks. Pattern of life analysis showed the enemy moving in small groups, 8 to 12 men, never more. They used the valley like a highway at night and disappeared into the rock during the day. The plan was elegant, as plans sometimes are before they meet reality. 2 assault elements would insert by helicopter 12 kilometers north of the gorge mouth. They'd move on foot through the night, establish blocking positions on both ends of the valley, and the 3rd element, a larger force, would push through the middle at first light, squeezing the network between 2 walls of steel and ending it. Simple, clean, done before noon. That's what the briefing said. I was attached to the 3rd element. Combat Controller Air Force, embedded with a SEAL team that had been operating in Kunar for 4 months and knew the terrain better than anyone. Or so we thought. Sergeant Kowalski, our team sergeant, big guy from Pittsburgh, hands like dinner plates, had a habit of drinking terrible instant coffee and making it look like he was enjoying it. Kowalski had done the map study 3 times over. He'd looked at the satellite imagery, looked at the elevation models, looked at the route. Feels tight, he told me the night before we stepped off. The gorge narrows about 4 clicks in. Didn't look that bad on imagery, but I want us to be smart about timing. I asked him what he meant by smart. I mean fast, he said. We don't want to be in that narrow section after sunrise. We want to be through it and holding the far end before the light changes. He was right. He was exactly right. And it didn't matter because the helicopter insert ran 90 minutes late due to weather at the FARP, and we stepped off behind schedule into a valley that was already beginning to breathe with early morning gray by the time we hit the narrow section. The gorge at its narrowest point was maybe 40 meters wide. Sheer rock faces on both sides, rising 300-400 meters straight up. The kind of terrain that makes your chest feel tight just looking at it. On the valley floor, loose rock, scattered boulders, a dry creek bed that twisted through the middle like a scar. Cover was poor, concealment was worse. And someone, many someones, as it turned out, had been waiting. I don't know exactly when they took up their positions. The analysis afterwards suggested they'd been in those rocks for days, not hours, prepositioned, patient. The kind of patience that tells you this wasn't a reaction, it was an invitation. The movement our ISR assets had been tracking for 3 weeks, those 8 to 12 man groups moving predictably through the valley, they were bait. They were the pattern. They were making us comfortable with the picture so that when the real thing happened, we'd walk straight into it. 381 men in a 40-meter-wide funnel. The first shot came from the eastern ridge, high, maybe 350 meters up. The crack of it ricocheted off the rock walls so that it seemed to come from everywhere at once, in front, behind, left, right. And in those first 2 seconds before the return fire started, before the radio exploded with traffic, I remember just the sound. That wild, multiplying echo, and then the second shot and the third, and then it wasn't shots anymore, it was a wall of noise. The kill zone was active. Within the first 4 minutes, we had 9 men down. Not all of them dead, some of them wounded, some of them pinned behind rocks and unable to move without exposing themselves to fire from above, but 9 men who were no longer fighting, and 372 men who were fighting back against an enemy on high ground who couldn't be reached. You've probably heard the phrase owning the high ground. Most people think of it as a metaphor, a military philosophy, something abstract. When you're in a gorge with rock walls on both sides and the enemy is 400 meters above you and every line of approach is covered, it stops being a metaphor. It becomes physics. It becomes math. The math was not in our favor. Kowalski's voice on the radio was calm. That was the thing about him, genuinely, actually calm, not performing calm, not the kind of voice you put on for the guys around you while your chest is hammering. He was just steady. Third element, consolidate on the creek bed. Get your casualties to the center mass. We need accountability. The creek bed gave us the best low ground cover. Boulders the size of cars. Men pressed behind them, muzzles up toward ridgelines they could barely see, calling out contacts that kept moving, kept repositioning, that seemed to understand our firing patterns before we established them. I was working the radio hard, trying to get air on station. We had 2 fast movers assigned to support our operation, FA-18s, call sign Viper flight, but they were holding 35 miles south because of the same weather system that had delayed our insert. And the weather wasn't clearing. Low cloud ceiling. The gorge itself was partially obscured from above. Even if I could get Viper flight on station, their targeting systems would be looking through soup. I transmitted our 9 line, sent the grid, gave them the situation. What came back made my stomach drop. Unable to support at this time. Cloud base is at 4,000 feet. We cannot see your position. Advise you have alternate options. Alternate options, right. I keyed the radio and said things I probably shouldn't put in print. Here's the thing about being pinned in a kill zone that people don't fully understand until they've been in one. It's not one continuous moment of terror. Terror requires energy, and energy is something you start rationing pretty quickly. What it actually is this exhausting sequence of immediate problems. The guy to your left is bleeding and you have to get a tourniquet on him. The guy to your right is calling a contact northeast and you have to relay it. The radio won't stop screaming. Someone is yelling for a medic. Someone else is calling out ammunition status. The cold you were feeling 20 minutes ago has completely disappeared because your body has made a decision about what actually matters. And underneath all of that, underneath the noise and the movement and the immediate problems, there is this quiet, constant awareness that you are in a place where the enemy has all the advantages, and every minute you stay there, the math gets worse. Kowalski called it out to command around the 40-minute mark. We had 17 casualties by then. The northern blocking element had been hit hard enough that they couldn't push south to link up with us. The southern blocking element had gone completely dark. We didn't know if they were fighting, hiding, or gone. The QRF, Quick Reaction Force, was 40 minutes out by helicopter and had no viable landing zone within 3 kilometers of our position. The official radio traffic from that call is part of the classified record. I wasn't on the main command net at that moment. I was still working air support, but Kowalski told me afterward in a parking lot at Bagram 6 days later what the response from higher command was. Hold position, maintain suppression, QRF is inbound. Hold position, in a kill zone for 40 more minutes. Kowalski looked at me in that parking lot and shook his head slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. What no one in that command center knew, what no one in that gorge knew except one person, was that there was already someone on the eastern ridge. She'd been there for 11 hours. Sergeant First Class Dilara Yousefi, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to a special reconnaissance element that had inserted 2 days before the main operation to conduct pattern-of-life observation on the valley. Her position was a shallow scrape in the rock, 2 feet wide, barely enough to fit her body and her equipment, positioned behind a natural boulder formation at an elevation of roughly 3,600 meters. Her mission was observation and reporting, not engagement. Her element, herself and 2 other operators, was positioned as eyes only. They had a strict communications protocol that required them to transmit burst reports every 6 hours and maintain radio silence otherwise to protect their position. They were not, under any circumstances, to reveal their presence or engage without direct authorization from higher command. She had been watching the valley below her for 2 days. She had watched the enemy fighters take their positions in the rocks. She had counted them methodically, patiently, the way she'd been trained to do everything. She had transmitted her report at 300, 2 hours before our element stepped off. She'd reported enemy fighters, pre-positioned, in numbers that significantly exceeded the pattern of life data the operation was based on. That report never reached the operational planning cell. A communications relay malfunction, an equipment failure at a forward node. The specifics are still disputed. What is not disputed is that the people planning our operation walked 381 men into that gorge without knowing what Dilara Yousefi had been watching for 48 hours. At the 53-minute mark of the engagement, with 24 men down, ammunition running low in 3 of our squads, and the QRF still 22 minutes out, Sergeant First Class Dilara Yousefi made a decision. She did not request authorization. There wasn't time, and she knew it. She had watched the math of that gorge for the past hour. She understood, with the clarity of someone who had studied it from above, exactly what was happening below her and exactly what the next 22 minutes would look like if nothing changed. She picked up her rifle. The rifle was a Mk13 Mod 7, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. In the hands of a trained sniper at altitude, in cold air, with a stable platform and sufficient time for calculation, it was capable of precision work at ranges exceeding 1,400 meters. Her position on the eastern ridge gave her a firing solution on 47 of the enemy positions she had mapped over 2 days. She ranged the first target. 830 meters. Slight crosswind from the north. Temperature approximately 4 degrees Celsius. She made her adjustments, settled her breathing, and fired. The echo of that shot rolled down the gorge and got lost in the noise of the firefight below. She worked the bolt, and she started at the top of her list. Down in the gorge, nobody heard the change at first. That sounds impossible. 300 and some odd men in a firefight, someone begins systematically removing the enemy from elevated positions. How do you not notice? But that's the thing about a sustained engagement in enclosed terrain. Your world shrinks. It shrinks down to what's in front of your muzzle, what's happening to the men immediately around you, what the radio is saying in your ear. the bigger picture disappears. You stop being able to process what's happening 50 meters away, let alone 400 meters above you. I noticed it at the ground level first, not the shots. I couldn't distinguish individual shots from the general chaos anymore. What I noticed was the volume, the rate of incoming fire from the eastern ridge, which had been the primary threat axis since minute 1, started dropping. Not dramatically, not all at once, just less. A gap here, a gap there. The kind of thing that makes a small part of your brain file a question mark, but you don't stop to examine it because you're still pointing your rifle at a boulder and your right ear is ringing and Specialist Donnelly is pulling at your sleeve telling you the frequency is down on the secondary radio. It was Kowalski who figured it out first. He told me afterward that he noticed the pattern. Specifically that the fire coming from the eastern positions wasn't just decreasing, it was decreasing from north to south, top to bottom, like something was moving through those positions in a sequence. He'd been in enough contact in enough places to recognize that pattern. Deliberate engagement from a fixed position, someone working a list. He got on the radio and just asked, to nobody specific to the air, is there a sniper element on the eastern ridge? Silence for a moment. Then a voice came back, quiet, unhurried, like someone who was in the middle of something and couldn't spare much attention. Third element, this is Sierra 7. I have your east side. Keep your heads down a little longer. Kowalski told me that he actually laughed. In the middle of all of it, he laughed. Not because it was funny, just because of what that voice sounded like. The absolute composure in it. He said it sounded like someone calling in a food order. Roger Sierra 7, he said back, appreciate the company. What Dilara Yousefi was doing on that ridge in those 41 minutes is something I've tried to explain to people who weren't there, and I always feel like the words don't quite get there. She had 47 positions mapped. She'd spent 2 days cataloging them, not just their locations but the behaviors of the fighters using them, their communication patterns, which positions fed supply and support to which other positions, which ones were command nodes. She'd built a picture of the enemy's tactical architecture from above, the way you might look down at a city and understand its streets and neighborhoods. When she opened fire, she didn't just start shooting at the nearest targets. She worked with intention. She hit the command positions first, the men with the radios, the men who were coordinating movement, the men whose removal would create confusion in the enemy's response before they even understood they were being engaged from above. Then she moved to the positions that were providing the heaviest fire into the creek bed. Then the flanking positions that had been threatening to push 2 of our squads further west. She was rewriting the tactical situation from the inside out, and she was doing it alone. One of the 2 operators in her element, a man named Corporal Ferris, I met him later in Germany, told me that he'd wanted to help, that he'd had his own rifle up and was ready to engage. Dilara had told him no. Her reasoning, he said, was immediate and completely practical. Their position was a 2-foot-wide scrape in the rock. 2 rifles firing at the same time would have created enough movement and flash signature that the enemy could have triangulated them within minutes. 1 shooter, 1 spotter. That was the geometry of survival. Ferris said she never raised her voice, just told him simply, clearly, where to spot and what to call, and then she went to work. In 41 minutes, she fired 63 rounds. 63 rounds. That's the number in the after-action reports. I've read the report. I've seen the number. And I still have trouble making it feel real, making it feel like something that actually happened in the world and not something from a story. She had 63 confirmed hits. 47 of her 47 mapped positions were neutralized. 12 of the other 16 rounds were taken on targets of opportunity. Fighters attempting to reposition. Fighters attempting to withdraw toward the gorge mouth. Fighters who had abandoned their prepared positions when the shooting started and were now exposed on open rock. The remaining 4 rounds missed. She told investigators, when they asked her about it later, exactly why each of those 4 rounds had missed. Wind shift on the 3rd, target movement on the 7th. Her own breathing on the 29th, she'd been holding a position for too long and her body had started sending her signals she'd slightly misread. And on the final one, the sight picture had simply been wrong, and she'd known it the moment she squeezed the trigger. 4 rounds, she remembered each one. The effect on the gorge below was something I experienced but still can't fully describe from my own ground-level perspective. What I can tell you is that around the 68th minute of the engagement, the incoming fire from the eastern ridge stopped. Not reduced. Stopped. And then, maybe 90 seconds later, the western ridge fire started breaking apart too. Not because of Delara. She didn't have a sight line on the western positions from where she was, but because the enemy fighters over there had watched their entire eastern support structure disappear in 40 minutes and were making rational decisions about whether to stay. When the QRF finally came in, 19 minutes later than projected because of a navigation issue with the lead aircraft, what they found was a kill zone that had almost stopped being a kill zone. They found 381 men, 26 of them wounded, none of them dead. They found an enemy force that had evaporated into the mountain. And they found a dry creek bed full of men who had been leaning against boulders in the cold for over an hour and were beginning, cautiously, and in the disoriented way of people coming down from extreme stress, to understand that they had survived something that should have gone differently. I want to be accurate about the numbers. 26 wounded, in an engagement of that intensity, in a position that compromised with those forces arrayed above us. By any rational analysis of the tactical situation, the casualty number should have been catastrophically higher. The reason it wasn't was sitting on a rock 400 meters above us, working a bolt-action rifle with the calm and precision of someone who had long ago made peace with what she was capable of. I want to talk about the orders part, because that's the part that matters, and it's the part that's gotten complicated in the telling of this story. She defied orders. Let's be honest about that. There's no other way to describe what she did. Her mission parameters were explicit: observe and report, no engagement without authorization. When she picked up that rifle and started firing, she was in direct violation of her operational mandate. The argument for why she was justified, and it is a compelling argument. And it is ultimately the argument that the Military Review Board found persuasive, though not without significant disagreement, is essentially this. She had transmitted intelligence that should have prevented the ambush. That intelligence had failed to reach the decision makers, and the direct result of that failure was 381 men in a position where following her orders to the letter would have been a passive choice to let them die. There's a word for that kind of choice. It's not in any military manual I've read, at least not in those terms, but soldiers understand it. The decision to act, knowing the consequences, knowing you're breaking the rules because the alternative is something you can't live with. She said, in the few statements she's made since the incident, that she didn't think about the orders in the moment. That's not accurate, I think, or at least, it's not the whole picture. What I believe, based on everything I've heard from Ferris and from the others who were with her, is that she thought about them and then set them aside deliberately with full awareness of what she was doing. That's different from not thinking about them. That's harder, actually, because it means she made a choice, not a reflex, not a panic response, a choice. I met her once, only once and briefly. It was at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, where most of our wounded had been evacuated. I was there for a day before they sent me on to the States. There was a common room on one of the floors. Institutional chairs, poor lighting, bad coffee from a machine in the corner. The kind of place that exists in every military hospital in every country, where the men and women waiting to find out if they're okay sit and try to talk about things that aren't what actually happened. She came in to visit some of the wounded. She wasn't wounded herself. She'd come out of the ridge without a scratch, which is either remarkable or, as Ferris described it, a product of the position she'd chosen and the discipline she'd maintained. She spent about an hour in that room. She was smaller than I expected. That's the most honest thing I can say. I don't know what I expected exactly. I'd built up an image in the way you do when you've heard a story about someone before you meet them. But she was just a person. Medium height, dark hair pulled back, a stillness about her that wasn't coldness. More like someone who had learned, somewhere along the way, to be very economical with energy. She sat with each of the guys for a while. Didn't say much from what I could see. Mostly listened. One of the guys from Kowalski's element, a young SEAL named Priestley, 24 years old, had caught a fragment in the side of his neck that had missed his artery by something the surgeon called, with dark professional humor, very little. Priestley held her hand for a while and didn't say anything at all. She let him. I didn't introduce myself. It didn't feel like the right moment. She wasn't there to be thanked. She wasn't there to be talked about. She was just there, the way you're there for people when something difficult has happened and the most useful thing you can offer is presence. I watched her from across the room and thought about what 63 rounds in 41 minutes actually meant, what it took to be the person who did that. And I didn't come up with an answer. I'm still not sure there is one. The inquiry lasted 7 weeks. The formal charge that was initially considered, violation of operational orders, unauthorized engagement, was ultimately not pursued. The review board, in its findings, noted the intelligence failure that had preceded the operation, the demonstrated impossibility of obtaining real-time authorization given the communications situation in the gorge, and what the findings called the extraordinary circumstances and immediate threat to friendly forces that would have been foreseeable to any reasonable operator in the position of Sergeant First Class Yousefi. They also noted the 63 confirmed engagements. They noted the 26 wounded and 0 killed. They noted the testimony of Kowalski and mine, and 37 other operators who submitted statements about what they believed would have happened in that gorge if the Eastern Ridge fire had continued for another 22 minutes. The charge was dropped. She was awarded the Silver Star. The citation was formal and precise and captured the technical facts of what she'd done with commendable accuracy. It did not capture, and could not capture, what it actually meant to be in that creek bed when the Eastern Ridge went quiet. I know men who have that citation memorized, who keep a copy of it, not because of what it says but because of what it represents. There's a piece of this story that bothers me, has bothered me since I first heard it, and I haven't been able to shake it. In the hours after the operation, when the inquiries were just beginning, and the story of what had happened was still being assembled from fragments, someone in the command structure, I don't know who, and the record is unclear on this, made an initial determination that Delara's engagement had been unauthorized and potentially subject to disciplinary action. There was a period of roughly 14 hours in the immediate aftermath of the operation, where the woman who had saved 381 lives was facing the possibility of formal charges for having done it. 14 hours. Kowalski found out about it. I'm not sure exactly how, but Kowalski found out about it, and I'm told, I wasn't there for this. This is secondhand from 2 people who were, that he walked into a briefing room at Bagram where several senior officers were present and said, with the particular Pittsburgh directness that was his most consistent characteristic, that if anyone in that room moved forward with charges against Sergeant Yousefi, every one of the 381 men who had been in that gorge would have something to say about it. He was told to watch his tone. He said he would not, in fact, be watching his tone. I don't know exactly how the conversation ended. What I know is that the initial determination was reversed. What I know is that the review process that followed was conducted fairly. What I know is that the Silver Star was awarded 8 months later at a ceremony at Fort Liberty, and Kowalski was in the front row.